Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome to the Networking RX podcast. This is Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today we have another great guest. I appreciate everybody tuning in. This is going to be very worthwhile. I've got Kwame Christian. And let me kind of go through, we'll let him talk as well, but I don't want him to have to say all this because then it sounds like he's bragging. He's the director of the American Negotiation Institute. He's also an adjunct professor at the Ohio State University, Moritz College of Law. He has a law degree. He has a master's from the John Glenn School of Public Affairs at Ohio State as well, and has a degree from Ohio State University. I have the impression, Kwame, that you are still paying Ohio State back for all this education. Is that probably true?
Absolutely.
And the other thing that Kwame has is he has a podcast called Negotiate Anything, and that's his expertise is negotiation, and that's why I wanted to get him on the program and talk about negotiation. It's this is a podcast about business relationships. It's a podcast about professional networking, and these aspects, they all kind of come into play. It's our lives are not siloed. And so anyhow, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, my friend.
Where I want to take this, and I kind of alluded to this when I first invited you on, is when people think of negotiations, they think of, okay, arm yourself with information, storm onto the car lot, make your best deal and drive away and hope you got the best of the car dealer and that you may never have to see him again. Next time I need a car, I'll go to a different dealership or the salespeople will have changed or whatever. And it's kind of like a I win, you lose kind of a thought pattern. And that's not life. We deal with people and the president, not maybe this president or any president, is not, he draws a hard line in the sand with China or Russia or whoever. He still has to deal with them. They don't go away. They're not going to another planet. So that's why I really want to kind of pick your brain a little bit about negotiation when there's this ongoing relationship and give our listeners some tips with respect to that.
Absolutely. And I think it's good to start with an operational definition for negotiation. When I think about negotiation, my definition is any conversation where somebody in a conversation wants something. And it is an intentionally broad definition because I think one of the biggest barriers people have when it comes to negotiating effectively is the fact that they have a very, very low level of negotiation awareness. They don't recognize that these negotiations are happening. And if you don't know that a negotiation is happening, then you don't know to use these negotiation skills at this time. So number one, have to recognize that these negotiations are happening every day. And the people with whom you negotiate the most are the people closest to you. So spouses, children, business partners, colleagues at work, we're doing it all the time. We just need to recognize it.
That's very insightful. I lost 3 negotiations already today. No, no, that is insightful because, and probably, and very true, not probably, very true, because it is always a give and take, Hey, can you pick up the kids? Well, I need you to stop and get this from the post office and, all this kind of interaction. I need to stay late. Well, I need to stay late at night this week. So yeah, very, very true. So obviously we handle it with our personal relationships. From a business standpoint, how do we come away? We want something. One party wants something. Probably both parties want something. How do we come away with relationship intact? What are some techniques? What are some pointers for making that work?
Yeah. So one thing that I do that is a little bit counterintuitive is that when it comes to the word negotiation, I only use that word academically.
Okay.
If I'm teaching negotiation, then I will talk about the word negotiation. But that is one word I don't use when I'm
Okay.
negotiating. Because here's the thing: when we are when we're in these situations, we are trying to determine the rules of engagement, right? And
Right.
so for the majority of people who just have the really surface level understanding of what a negotiation is, when they think negotiation, they think about an antagonistic relationship between two people, where it's a necessarily combative interaction, where you want something, I want to prevent you from getting it, and vice versa. And so whenever I'm going into these conversations, I say, hey, let's schedule a time to chat. When are you free for a quick call? Those things, they are negotiations, but I will never call them that. And I think that's important because it reduces the pressure on both sides. Oh yeah, I can chat with Frank anytime. That doesn't sound too bad. And then one of the keys to persuasion is that effective persuasion needs to be imperceptible. So if I know that you're trying to change my mentality or change my mind or get something from me and persuade me in some way, then I'm going to put up some barriers. I'm going to put up some resistance, right? But if it just seems like it's an everyday conversation, then I'm a lot less resistant to the changes that you want to make.
Okay. I mean, this is very interesting. Harkens back to a podcast interview we released just a couple weeks ago with Brian Ahern, whom you know, who talks on influence and a lot of the same things, that these things are kind of subtle triggers. And you're right, though, you know, as soon as you tell somebody, hey, I'm trying to, you know, this is what I'm doing, it's not going to happen. And I like the notion of not using the word negotiation, because it's akin to using the word war. You know, if you use the word war, it automatically, hey, we have a price war. You know, we're having a trade war. And if we didn't call the trade war a trade war, it would probably be perceived a whole lot differently. But we hear the word war, it's like, oh my gosh, you know.
Exactly.
Same sort of a thing. Well, let's say people out there, they're talking with bosses about getting raises. They're talking with clients about not necessarily getting a raise, but closing the deal. What are some thoughts you have for the kind of to kind of set that situation up as best as possible?
Right. So what I will say is this. I view all of our relationships as a never-ending game of chess when it comes to these negotiations. From the moment I meet you, in one way or another, I'm persuading you one way or another. So it might not be anything specifically that I need from you, but if I'm networking, I am trying to persuade you that I'm a decent person, worthy of respect, and you should like and trust me. That's it. I don't know if down the road I might need something for you or I might need to persuade you in a more business context, but I'm setting the stage in that way. Another thing that I'm doing is in every single conversation that I have, to a certain extent, I'm utilizing the light theory of negotiation. So imagine if you are in a room that you've never been in and the lights are completely off. It's completely dark and you need to navigate to the other side of the room. The first thing you're going to do is turn on the lights, because I might bump into something and hurt myself. I might run into you and hurt you. There might be obstacles that I don't see. And so the equivalent of light in this metaphor when it comes to real life is information. Going into all of these conversations, before and during the conversation, I want to get as much information. So I want to prepare beforehand, research the situation and understand what's happening before the conversation. And then during the conversation, I'm utilizing the most powerful persuasive tool, which is the open-ended question. Questions that start with who, what, where, when, and how. Avoiding questions that start with why, because oftentimes why questions trigger judgment. So we want to avoid those. But I want to keep on turning on the lights in these conversations so I can gather more information and then persuade more effectively.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think gathering information with ongoing relationships is it's ongoing. It's never ending. And we can be gathering information today that is critical down the line, person has kids. Okay. summer isn't going to work for them because they've got kids who want to spend more time with their kids or whatever it might be. That may not be the best example, but similar sorts of things.
Exactly.
We understand where they're coming from. I like that quote. All relationships are a never-ending game of chess. I like that. I don't really understand chess. I mean, I get the concept of it, but it's true. I mean, it is an ongoing game, and so you're gathering this information. You end up getting what you want, and then you get the sense that they feel slighted. Then what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now we have another difficult conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because now what is the thing that we want? We want to rebuild the relationship. We want to make sure everything's okay. And so that's what we want. So we're going to create a persuasive strategy around that. So when it comes to these conversations, if it's a situation where somebody feels slighted or hurt, number one, we need to clearly define the problem. And number two, we need to get a clear understanding of the impact of whatever the problem is on them. And so we want them to feel comfortable sharing that. And so before we go into problem solving mode, we need to acknowledge the emotions, because one of the things that often is overlooked when it comes to the persuasive process is addressing the emotional needs of the other side. Because within every conversation, there is an emotional need and a substantive need. And in order for you to move forward, you need to be able to, at least to a certain extent, address both. And so maybe the person didn't feel appreciated during the conversation. What can I do about that? Maybe they didn't feel respected. Oh, okay. And I didn't realize that. Now I can create some strategies around that. But first, I need to acknowledge what was done, the damage, and then, if appropriate, apologize. And then you can move forward to gathering information and creating solutions, but not until you address that emotional side and clearly define the problem.
Okay, as a follow-up to that, what happens when you come away from a negotiation and you're the one that's not happy? You feel like you've given up too much. You've just been too, for whatever reason, don't think you have the power or whatever, but you didn't really get what you didn't get what you wanted, or get all of what you wanted, however that might be.
That's a great question. Actually, I think that's the first time I've been asked that question. I love it. So here's number one. Number one, first we need to look into ourselves and figure out why it is we feel the way that we do. A lot of times we engage in distraction to take us away from addressing our feelings. But understanding that is important, because our feelings are a signal into what really matters to us. So we need to dig deeply into ourselves and figure out what the problem is. That's the first thing. Once we clarify that problem for ourselves, we can create a strategy around what we can do to address that. And so at this point, before we go into the next conversation, we need to kind of replay the tape, is what I call it. So think about a sports analogy. If you're a coach, you don't just send your athletes in to just play and that's it. You, after every performance, you do film study. You look at what you did, what you did well, what you did poorly, so you can improve every time. And it provide this failure in this negotiation provides you with an opportunity to improve. Fix those holes in your game so the next time you have the conversation, you can do better. So if it is a substantive issue, then you can renegotiate. The name of my podcast is Negotiate Anything for a Reason. So if there's something substantive that you want to get next time, then you can have that conversation. And I'm reading this book now called Start With No. And sometimes being vulnerable is the best way to start. And he even said, sometimes starting the conversation off saying, last time we negotiated, I did a bad job. I didn't get a good deal, and that's my fault. And because of that, now in this conversation, I need to do a better job to do better for my company and for my family, whatever it is. But even starting off saying, I made a mistake, I'm not going to make that mistake this time, lets them know that, hey, okay, I can anticipate a little bit more of a pushback, but it puts them on notice so they can adjust their expectations. So they're not surprised when, well, Frank was a pushover last time. Now he's acting really tough. this is kind of strange. But if you say, listen, I didn't do a good job, I need more, and these are the reasons why I need more, now they're kind of put on notice that the approach is going to change. But you still do this in a way that is firm but fair and respectful throughout the process. Because if you do it that way, now you're not jeopardizing the relationship through the process.
Well, I guess one of the things we need to do is remind ourselves that, again, this is not the car dealership, but remind ourselves, hey, this is our boss, this is our client, this is our vendor, that in a lot of situations, they need us as much as we need them. So they need it to be fair too. And if I have an employee and my employee is not happy with what he or she's getting paid, hopefully they're not listening, but they are, if I know that, I want them to be happy. It's hard to find good people. And so coming back at your employer, or I keep thinking employer, or a client or whatever it is, and letting them know, hey, this wasn't, I don't want to say not fair, but it wasn't what I needed to make this work.
Exactly. Yeah, you're acknowledging the fact that you're human and you made a mistake. This business agreement, this arrangement is no longer tenable. And as a result of the changing that happens just as the world turns, as time moves on, now it's untenable. And these are the adjustments we need to make. And this is why we need to make it. Whenever it comes to these situations, you can't just demand things and make naked demands. That's a little bit aggressive, right? You need to explain it, because people are meaning-making machines. That's our brain. Our brain is a meaning-making machine. And so, especially in these situations where our additional request can be interpreted as a threat, you can assume that the ambiguity is going to be interpreted negatively. So you better come up with a reason why, because if you don't, they will come up with a reason why in their head, and it won't be favorable to you.
Yeah. Very good. You have a podcast, Negotiate Anything. People don't make money doing podcasts. I know you do other things. Let's talk about you and talk about your business and things you're looking for to. I know we've had conversations. You've talked about your workshop. What are some good referrals that people listening might send your way? And then we'll follow up that with, how do people get a hold of you? So.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Frank. So it's really two things. When it comes to the negotiation and conflict resolution workshops, it's usually sales teams or negotiation teams. So I see that in procurement, purchasing, sourcing, those type of things, where they are negotiating deals for their business, trying to get large dollar amounts, focusing on the money. And on the other side, we have essentially leadership and team building. Within every organization, you have to work on a team, and there's going to be interaction with people. And whenever there is regular interaction with people, there's going to be conflict. Right. So focusing on the conflict resolution side, how you can persuade people on your team that you're going to have to see the next day or at lunch, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
How do we have those difficult conversations in a way where the relationship doesn't just stay intact, it can actually improve through the process?
What if somebody's in a negotiation? Do you actually get involved on one side or the other, do mediation, those sorts of things?
Yeah, so I mediate. I was actually mediating all day yesterday. So I do private mediations, and I also do some negotiation consulting. I realize that the bulk of the business comes from the education side, the workshops and whatnot, because people would prefer their teams to be empowered to do it themselves than to have somebody come in. But in extreme circumstances, I have been brought in to kind of provide negotiation strategy and support in that regard.
Okay. Somebody listening wants to get a hold of you, would like to hire you or have you come in and talk to their group. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way to get a hold of me is via email. And I'll provide that, so you can put that in the link, Kwame at AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com, and also LinkedIn. Very active on LinkedIn. I'm trying to be the Frank Agan of negotiation. That's my goal.
Okay.
So try to stay active on LinkedIn.
In my mind, that sounds like a demotion.
That's funny.
Why do you want to do that? Hey, I really appreciate you being on the program today. This is great. This is a great content, great follow-up to the interview we just released a couple weeks ago with Brian Ahern. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Frank.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.